do is give us any amount of time and we can fill it up. Okay. So what I like to do is set a little timer because I don't want to go into coffee break time because then all of you will be mad at me. So these are if you don't have them, if you want to show it to your teachers, it's called Perfection Timer. And it looks like this. You can set it for any amount of minutes. And like I'm going to hit start right now. And it starts to count down. But the nice thing about it is the screen doesn't go dark. So if you have an activity with your students and they have 10 minutes, you can start it, set it up, and they immediately know how much time they have. And I don't know about you, but I taught for a long time. If my students see the countdown, they're more productive because they know, oh, we only have that much time left. So I'm actually going to sit this right down here so I can pay attention to it. Oh, no, wait. I got one other thing I need to do that I've started every session with while we've been doing this. Okay, I want all of you to smile. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Very good. By the way, this is the best looking audience we've seen the whole time, you know, and you're going to see that. Now we have some really nice things going on today. By the way, one last little thing about this. When you get to 0, it starts to count backwards. So you actually see in red how much time you're going over. When it hits red, that's when my colleagues John and Andrea get mad at me because I'm cutting into their time for the breakout rooms. We do have 4 really nice breakouts today. K-5 literacy is going to be in this room. If you go out the hall and you go right, the first room you come to is science, K-12 science. The very next room is K-12 math. And then out by the elevators, you'll see a sign pointing you that way. 612 ELA is in the far room down there. Now, I'm going to get out of this PowerPoint for a minute. And if you don't mind, I'm going to bring this one up. There we go. Can you see that? Nope. There we go. Okay. Now, what I want to do, I want to take you through, I call this challenges and opportunities. Okay. I've been in education longer than I want to tell any of you. Okay. Because it ages me a little bit. And in that time, we've always had challenges. Okay. There are different things that end up incrementally inhibiting what we do as a profession. And we have certain ones right now that we have not experienced in the past. Okay? And we're going to look at that as we go through it. Now, I do want to mention a couple of things. I want to preface it really quickly. Some of the things I'm going to share with you around learning loss and inquiry in the classroom are based on research that has been done. The learning loss material comes from a study that was done in Harvard University. And secondly, a study that was done by the World Bank, where they took 35 studies from around the world on learning loss based on COVID, aggregated all the data, and put it together. At the end of the session, I'm going to bring a link and a QR code up on here that has a file folder with the presentation and with those research studies in it. So if you're interested in that information, you know, if you want to take a picture of something on the screen today, feel free, but it will be in the handout that's in that folder when you have the opportunity to download it. But the second thing I'm going to mention, some of what I'm going to say today is my opinion. From the research, from my experience, from colleagues, from working in schools in the US and around the Middle East and Asia, there are certain trends that you start to see, and we evaluate and develop our own ideas. So some of what I'm going to say is my idea. You can feel free to disagree with it. I will not get upset at you. I'll be okay that you're wrong. Okay? No, I'm really kidding. But I just want you to know that. The other thing I want to bring up is these are the 3 topics. Now, I have to tell you, yesterday I did not do so well managing my time, and we got through the first 2. The last one they had to get in the handout. So we're going to see if we can touch on all 3 today. But we're going to start out with learning loss and COVID-19. We're going to spend a little bit of time of inquiry in the classroom, and then hopefully we're going to end up with a little bit on data-driven instruction. Now, none of this is going to be in depth. It's higher level ideas that we're working with and thinking about as we walk our way through this. One of the reasons, though, I think this is important is right up here on the screen. Now, I know what you're thinking. He has beautiful children. Unfortunately, they are not my children. Fortunately, they are my grandchildren, okay? Yes, and I know, oh, you look way too young to have grandchildren. I know. But I'm in there, that's Cora. Cora is 5, she'll be 6 in July. She's in kindergarten. She and then Charlie on the end are brother and sister. They're my oldest daughter's children. Charlie is 2, he'll be 3 in June. In the middle, on this side, you have Avery. Avery is 6, she'll be 7 in March. She's in 1st grade. And then next to her is her sister, Finley. Finley's the one you got to keep your eye on. You guys know what I mean? Yeah. She's the one that says, okay, it's time to take your bath. Well, maybe we should do this before we take, she's the manipulator, okay? She's in pre-K and will be in kindergarten next year. And the reason I put this picture up, honestly, is because the decisions we make in the next few years as a classroom teacher, as a building leader, or as a leader of multiple buildings, will actually impact their future and the future of every one of the students coming into our schools and growing up in our schools. So it really is a matter of import what we do. Now, if you take a look at this statement, here is the other reason that it is essential that we do some of these things. This actually comes out of the new framework for school evaluation from the UAE. It comes out of the major draft. But if you look at this domain, the vision of achievement, in that sentence right there, the second one, it evaluates the extent to which the school maximizes the potential of each student. And the topics we're going to look at today, all 3 of them, relate to maximizing the potential of every single student. Because in the past, we've maximized the potential of some students, but there are other students that have been left behind and have not reached their own full potential. Now, during the morning and during the breakout sessions, I'm going to ask you to do 2 things, okay? The first one, I'm just asking you to be engaged, to thoughtfully consider what we're talking about, to think about how does it relate to my classroom, how does it relate to my building, how does it relate to my teachers and my buildings that I oversee. So I want you to think about it. Thinking about it is good, but it's not great. And here's why I say that. How many of you have thought about going on a diet? Okay. It's pretty good, but it doesn't do a lot, does it? Okay. How many of us have thought about exercise? Yeah, I think about it, and it's a nice thought, but if it only goes there, nothing really happens. So here's the second thing I'm going to ask you to do. As you're thinking through the sessions today, whether it's this session, whether it's the literacy session and so on, I want you to think, is there something I've heard today that is going to spark me to some kind of action? Now, it may not be anything new. In fact, a lot of what I'm going to share with you say, yeah, that reconfirms what I thought, or I already knew that. But sometimes the things we know, like exercise and diet, we don't do. And so it's really about thinking, is there one thing I can take away today that I can use in my classroom? And that's for those of us in the room and actually those of us that are streaming in on Zoom, which all of us are tired of doing, right? Okay. So, but I want you to think about it. Is there something we need to do? Because I tell you what, you're giving us today one of the most precious gifts that you have to offer. You're giving us your time this morning. You're giving us a number of hours that you will never get back. And if you walk away and all we did was hear some nice things, but we don't do anything, all of us wasted our morning. Okay. So let's jump into this. Start out with, let's support learning soft. And let me ask you this question. Is learning loss from COVID a real thing? It absolutely is. Okay. We absolutely have seen that it happens. In the study that was done by the World Bank, the actual aggregation data study, the lead author of this, Thomas J. Kane, made this statement or analogy. The pandemic was like a band of tornadoes that swept across the country and the world. Some communities were left relatively untouched, while neighbor schools were devastated. In fact, one of the things we found is that even when a district or a group of schools, the impact of COVID was variable. It was different from school to school. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. Does anybody know the other name or the nickname for Detroit? What? Yeah, it's one of them, okay? Motown is one. The other one I always grew up with was, we're the Motor City. Because what did Detroit do? We built automobiles, okay? So I grew up in the Motor City. We didn't have a lot of tornadoes, thankfully. Andrea, my colleague, who's doing the science session, lives in Missouri. Missouri, Oklahoma, and Kansas are big tornado states. And a number of years ago, I was with one of my colleagues in Missouri, and on a way to a school, we actually drove through a neighborhood where a tornado had hit about 2 weeks earlier. And I was really surprised because of this. When we first pulled in the street into the neighborhood, the first two houses looked perfectly fine. You could not tell there was a storm. Everything looked great. The next house was gone. I mean, it was just gone. The next house was fine, and then the next two houses, the roof was off one and the side of one was torn off the building. Because you know what a tornado does? A tornado jumps. It's on the ground, it hits something, it devastates it, it jumps back up in the air and lands somewhere else. And really what they're saying, the fact of learning loss is very similar to that. Some buildings were fine, others were not. Now, out of the study, there were two significant data points. I'm not a statistician. I am a mathematician, but I haven't spent a lot of time doing statistics in the last number of years. But on average, students suffered a 0.17 standard deviation. That part doesn't mean that much to me, but notice the rest of the sentence, which is equivalent to a half a year of loss of knowledge and skills. Now, guys, think with me just for a minute. If I was in KR1 and I lost the last half of the year, and then I go into, I'm a first grader, I missed the second half of first grade, and I go into second grade. Is that going to have an impact on me? Absolutely. You think about the phonics and phonemic awareness we teach in KN1, and you get a student going in that's lost that part, it definitely is going to impact what they do in their effectiveness. Let's go to high school. Let's take a student in Algebra 1 and they miss the last half of Algebra 1 and then we put them in Algebra 2. Is it going to have an impact? Absolutely, because of the way knowledge builds. Now, the other thing to note about this is that is an average of a half a year loss. There are some students that have far greater than half a year. There are other students that were shown in the study that didn't lose anything. And part of that is explained by the bottom statement. The finding was that in different groups, like socioeconomic status, the lower the socioeconomic status, the greater the learning loss. The higher, the less the learning loss. The second one, were they already struggling in their prior academic knowledge before COVID? That made it worse. And then notice the bottom one, it differed by subject. In fact, the learning loss in mathematics was greater than the learning loss in literacy. And I don't think it surprises any of us, because if I was home, I can still read, I can still develop my comprehension in that. But if I'm at home, how many of us think, oh, I'm going to pick up a math problem and do it now? You know, we'll do that with a book and read. We typically don't do that with mathematics. And so those students suffered more loss. One other thing I want you to think about, not only was the learning loss in content and skills, but the other thing, you have some students now that are in second grade that didn't even go to a building for kindergarten and missed part of first grade. So not only was there a knowledge gap, there also was a social emotional gap. Because you know what? A good part of kindergarten is, how do we interact with other students? How do we behave in a classroom? How do I respond to a teacher? And many of them lost that, and now we have second grade teachers who haven't had to deal with that before, now having to learn how to manage a classroom differently and build those skills. In fact, that behavior in the classroom also impacts the learning that happens in the classroom. So it's a loss, okay, that's happened. Now, I'm in the handout, you'll see this. If you're really interested, you can look at the data. But these were some of the different studies that were done, and notice the countries on the left-hand side. There was actually one study in the group that was directly for the UAE, but they did not have the data in it around the closure and the average learning loss, so I didn't include it in here. But that study is included that if you wanted to go back and look at it, you could. But notice the difference. Closure and length of weeks, and that means not virtual school. It means they didn't have school. And then look at the relative learning loss. Now, the way I judge this, that first one in Mexico, the schools were actually closed for 48 weeks. Think about that. Notice the learning loss, it's 0.55. That's 3 times what the average was. But if we go down and look at it, we can see not all of it is tied directly to the amount of weeks that the school was closed. There are other factors that tie into that learning loss. But I have a shocking fact for you that I want to throw up here. Learning loss is not new. It existed before COVID. COVID has definitely impacted it on more students, but it's not new. It's been around forever. Because you think about this, if you have 30 students in your classroom, how many different levels are they in? Let's say in literacy. You know what? They're in 30 different levels. Now, in one area, they might be really strong and above average. And in another area, they might be really weak and below average. And you know, those strengths and weaknesses are different for every single student. So it's not new, but it's something that we really need to look at addressing. And I will tell you, most of my teaching experiences in the US, it is really disappointing to me as a country in our educational system, how we have dealt with learning loss in the past, and really some of the things that we're doing now. So I want you to think about this with me. I just wanted to pull this up again, just relate it directly back to some of the things that impact you with the evaluation criteria. You're going to notice as we get down in domain 2 around teaching and learning, the whole focus on differentiated instruction, differentiated learning, to actually meet the potential of every single student, okay? But really what I want you to think about is this. Think about the resources we use in the classroom. And if we start out with a core resource or the core topic that we're teaching, and you know what, let me ask this question just really quick. And those of you, that are visiting by Zoom, I can't see your response, but I'd love to know, how many of you are classroom teachers? You're still, okay, great. Okay. How many of you are building leaders? How many of you manage multiple buildings? What are the rest of you doing here? No, I'm kind of joking, kind of. Okay, so I want you to think it from this perspective. But that core instruction, I don't care if it's math, literacy, whatever subject you teach, that core instruction is about meeting the standards and skills for that grade level, is it not? Hey. Now, we know students coming in are missing prerequisite skills. We know some students we need to extend learning, right? And in general, a core program like McGraw Hill produces for math or literacy, okay? A core program will meet the needs of the classroom for the on-grade level standards. And typically, there are resources in it that will go a grade level below with prerequisite skills. And we'll have materials to extend learning for students on topics that they're dealing with. But what I want you to think about in your head is that band is about a grade level below, half a grade level to a grade level above, okay? That's what the focus of that core classroom and core material is. Because at the end of the day, and let me just ask, do I have any second grade teachers? Second grade? Back here. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, I want them to master the second grade concepts and the second grade skills, right? And that's what the third grade teacher is expecting when they walk in. Now, it's not always the case. We know that. So just think about that. Core, about a grade level below, half grade level to a grade level above, okay? That means for a student that is more than a grade level below, that core resource or that core thing we do in the classroom is not going to meet their need. So what are we going to do about that? Well, I want you to think about 2 other pieces that kind of fall into that. The first one I'm going to pull in is this, personalized instruction. Now, differentiation is not personalized instruction. It's not. Because most of us in our classroom, and some of you said it when I asked how many levels they are on, most of us can differentiate in 2 to 3 levels. I can do some below level support, I can extend the learning a little bit, but you know what? I can't physically make it happen that I differentiate learning for every single student in my classroom. There is not enough time in the day. You do not have the ability to do that. So one of the options, if a student is more than a grade level behind, or if I really need to challenge a student, is to get them involved in some kind of personalized instruction. Now, when I say personalized instruction, what I mean by that is typically using some kind of adaptive computer-based program that the students take an initial assessment. It targets their personal weaknesses or personal strengths, and it focuses them on those things that are specific to that student. Now, it does not take the place of what you do in the core classroom. Research has shown over and over again, the number one most important factor in a student's education is the classroom teacher. But I cannot physically, mentally, or creatively meet the need of every single student. So what we need to start doing is thinking about, do I have something built into my class, into my building, or into my buildings that is going to meet the needs of every one of those students? And the reason this is more important today than ever is 2 reasons. One is because COVID has extended that learning loss. And most of us in our schools, and I would agree with you, don't want to take a 3rd grade student and put them back in 1st grade. It's not healthy for the student, not healthy for the 1st graders where we're putting that student like that. We don't want to take a 10th grader and put him in a class with a 5th grader, because we know social and emotionally it's not appropriate to do that. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're meeting the need of that 10th grader that's working on a 6th grade level or 5th grade level. You and I can't do that. Personalized learning can help do that. It can be used 2 different ways. One, it could be used in the classroom as an extension of what the teacher does. Now, it's not the focus. And one of the ways I recommend that people use personalized learning, like one program we have, I'll talk a little about, it's called ALEX. It's an adaptive math program for 3rd through 12th grade. One of the ways that can be used in the core classroom is, you know what? Part of your grade is that you spend 45 minutes a week in your ALEX program, and it actually tracks it. And if you put your 45 minutes in, I give you the grade for it. The other way I have some people do it, ALEX breaks math down into small topics. You have to finish 7 topics this week. As a teacher, I can see that. You get your grade for ALEX, because what it's doing, it's making them work on the things that they need that are going to support you in the core classroom. Okay? So personalized instruction, number one, could be used in the core classroom as an extension. Secondly, it could be used in some kind of alternate time setting, whether it's a separate hour in the day, whether it's after school. Personalized learning is something that's great to use for summer school, because why should a student in 6th grade math go to summer school and have to study everything? Isn't the point to pick up the skills that they're lacking? So it's a great way to use it. So we have personalized learning. And the third part of this is what I call intensive intervention. These are 3 parts of what could be used to help a student actually maximize their individual potential. Now, by intensive intervention, many of you know what I mean by this already. Typically, it's not personalized learning. I'm working with small groups or groups of students at the same time. I still start out with initial diagnostic assessment that helps me know what level I start the student on. And then there are a couple different kinds of this. Personalized learning on this side can be used with the core classroom. Intensive intervention cannot. You, as the core classroom teacher, do not have the time to do intensive intervention in your classroom. And what that means is, and there has to be a designated time when we do that. Now, I was talking to one group earlier this week. They do it in an after-school setting. Okay, If you can do that, it's great. And if we can get the students to do that, it's targeting on those prerequisite skills, multiple grade levels behind. Ideally, it's done during the school day. Ideally, because then students aren't having to do extra time. But I'm going to tell you this, if it's done during the school day, it can't be where we're pulling the student out of their regular class. In the US, we do a lot of pullout. The problem with pullout is now they're missing the core instruction. So maybe I worked on the skill, but then they lost what was happening today. So I'm kind of cheating them one way, from the other. So you really need to think about this. So here's just for a second in your mind what I want you to think about. At our school, I know you're doing the core instruction part. Okay, I know you're doing that. But when we think about learning loss, whether it's COVID related or not, what are we doing to help students recover the missing skills that they have, either through personalized, through intensive intervention, or through a combination of both of those things? And by the way, when I say a combination of both, I actually could take a student that's 2 grade levels behind or 2.5, and by using personalized learning in my classroom, I can help them catch up. If that student is, let's say, a 10th grade student that's reading on a 3rd grade level, I could do personalized learning in my classroom, but I will tell you, it's probably not going to help them catch up to where they need to be. That's where I need intensive intervention to really look at that student. Okay. Now, probably all of you have seen this, the pyramid of MTSS, multi-tiered system of support. Okay. Down on the bottom one, let's again relate this to what we talk about. That bottom one, that tier 1 support, our core program for math, I'm going to use math as an example. Our core program is ALEX, or Reveal Math, I'm sorry. It's Reveal Math. In Reveal Math, at my primary teachers, every unit starts out with a unit diagnostic. It looks at the prerequisite skills needed in that unit, and it has an embedded targeted intervention lesson to do small group with those students on that prerequisite skill. But it's only the prerequisite skill to that lesson. It's not down below. That's why it's tier 1. So it can support tier 1. Okay. So that's our core. Now, it doesn't matter what core you're using. If you're using another company that has some awful program, no, I'm just kidding. Okay. So it's not about McGraw Hill. It really is about the resource that you're using. Most of them have some kind of leveled support built in. Then I need to think about my tier 2. The core program's not going to do tier 2 intervention. This is where personalized could come in. So like for us, you notice we have 2, Redbird and ALEX. They cross over grade levels. The main reason we have something for K2, 3, 4 rather than ALEX is because of the amount of reading students have to do. It's much more visual, that kind of thing. But that's personalized. ALEX, they take that short assessment. It identifies what they know in the course, what they don't know, and what they're ready to learn. If they were in 6th grade math and they score very low, there's already an RTI course built in that I can put them in that gathers those grade level, way below grade level materials, okay? And then, so this is personalized. Can it be used in the core classroom? Yes, okay? Does it have to be used in the core classroom? No, I mean, it can be done as a separate block of time. Again, works great for summer school. I have another slide I'm not going to put up today that's very similar with literacy. We have Wonders or Study Sync, which is our core literacy. On this side, we have Achieve Literacy, which is our personalized program. And then if I pop this over here, those are our intensive intervention programs. Intensive intervention should have research support behind it that shows the efficacy of the program. All of these programs have this. Number Worlds is teacher directed. The student takes the assessment and identifies out of multiple levels what level the student is, and that's where we start working with them. The other 2, Connecting Math Concepts and Corrective Mathematics, are direct instruction programs. Direct instruction is not a product. It's a pedagogy. Have any of you taught direct instruction? Yes, okay. Direct instruction, most teachers don't like it. And you know why they don't like it? Because it's scripted. I pick the book up. This is what I say to the students. I ask them this question. I repeat this. And you know why we do it? Because it's ultra focused on the skill the student needs to develop. Direct instruction cannot be done in the core classroom. It has to be a separate time with a teacher targeted on that based on the skills. But what research shows is that if you use it as it's designed to be used, we can see 2 to 3 year growth in one school year. So even though I might not like the fact that it's scripted, it's for a specific purpose to do that. Now, again, if I were doing this for literacy, up in this corner would be reading mastery and corrective reading, which are direct instruction programs that are meant for intense intervention. So guys, when you think about this, it's really interesting what we're doing. And again, I just want to say, it's not about a McGraw Hill product. It's about us in our schools looking and saying, for our students, are we helping each one reach their maximum potential? And are we doing that? You know, some students, all they need is the core. Some students, though, need that tier 2 support, and other students need that tier 3 support in order for them to do that. So here's the question I'm kind of asking to you. You know what? And this question is a global question. But are we committed to doing what's necessary to reach every one of our students? You know, the new evaluation criteria, that's one of the things they focused on, is are we helping every student maximize their individual potential? Is that potential going to be the same place for every student? No. But it's maximizing their potential. And we know this is one of the saddest things to me. And I'm not sure how we do it here, but like, you know, I taught mainly middle school and high school. And my last position in the school I was in, my title was the Dean of Students. And half of my job was working with the at-risk 9th or 10th graders that had failed multiple years of math, were struggling with literacy. And then those students that had failed 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math, you know what we did? We had high standards, so we put them in Algebra 1. Can you predict what's going to happen to that student in Algebra 1? All of you can predict it. They're not going to be successful. So immediately 2 things happen. The student's not engaged. They can become a behavior issue. And one, in the US, many of those students are not going to graduate or they're going to drop out. But we have not had the will to say we have to make a separate time to make sure that student has the basic math skills or the basic reading skills, but isn't that what we should be equipping with them? Okay. So this is just kind of a summary right here. Core can support tier 1 intervention. Grade level below, half grade level above. Personalized really is focused on tier 1 and 2, but can be used, if I do it in a pullout, it can be focused on tier 3. I can use it that way. Intensive intervention, regardless of whether you're using a personalized resource or you're using an intensive intervention resource, requires a separate time to do it. And then the last one, a combination of 2 or all 3 of these is what's needed to meet the needs of our student. So we're going to pause there. We're going to flip over to our next topic really quickly. But here's what I want you thinking about. In your classroom, in your building, in your buildings, what are you doing currently? And are you doing enough that it is going to meet the needs of every student in your building? Because I am just convinced, and like I said, you guys are feel free to disagree with me. I am convinced, though, that helping every student can't just happen in the core classroom. We have to have the will to say, what are we going to do creatively to meet the needs of our students? Okay. Think about this just for a second. We'll wrap this topic up with this. The green line is traditional instruction. Okay. That's that standard bell curve all of us have seen, right? Got a big tail on both ends. So that means these group in the middle, that Y group there, you know, they're doing well. This big chunk back here, though, they're missing stuff. And in fact, with COVID, they're missing more. When you start to use personalized learning and intervention, what happens is it starts pushing us towards mastery. We're not just worried about a letter grade. We want to know, did they master the skill and the concept? It starts pushing it. And when we use personalized learning, notice what happens to the tails. They're still there, by the way, but they become smaller and smaller because I'm meeting the needs of every individual student. And this is the last slide I want to use on this one. This is what we're still doing a lot. We're still doing a lot of this. And you know what? What we know is we get the same thing that we've always got when we do that. If we start thinking about personalized learning and evaluating students' performance based on skill and skill mastery, we start to move up, and what happens eventually, we're going to improve learning outcomes for our students because we meet their need. Okay? So COVID, learning loss, it's a real thing. It's not a new thing. It's just exacerbated by the problem or extended by the problem. And we have an option to look at our schools and to say, what are we going to do as far as core, personalized, and intensive intervention in order to meet their needs of our student? Okay. I'm going to flip over to topic number 2. Is it okay? Can we switch gears? Still goes to student performance. It still goes meeting the needs of individual students. But let's think about inquiry and research for a moment. Okay. What I want you to think about, many of you, when we get into this one, are already doing this, but I want you to think about this statement. I'm going to let you read it for a second. I'd like to know if it's true or not. You think it's true? You think so? Okay. Why? Okay. Why is that true? So do me a favor, because there are a lot of us. Turn to the people at your table and tell them why you think it's true. If you're at a table by yourself, you get to consider it or talk to somebody else, okay? Boy, I like looking at you guys talking. That's a cool thing. So guys, let me just have you think about this for a second. If I'm asking the question, typically I'm looking for the information I've already given the students. And I'm just looking for them to give it back to me, okay? If I really get a student involved in the idea, the questions they're going to start asking, I don't expect to know all the answers. You know, I'm not the Encyclopedia Britannica or Wikipedia that I know everything. I want to see what questions, but I want you to think about this. One strategy we started using in our high school science program is called the driving question board. We introduce the topic with a phenomenon, and then as questions come up, whether it's right then or during the study, we put them on a sticky note and stick them up on the board. As we start to study and do experiments and look at the idea, you know what? I think we found the answer to this one. We can put that answer down and pull it off. But you know what? It made 3 more questions come up. Whose questions are those? It gives them a need to learn and actually drives instruction and engagement on behalf of our students, okay? So we want to see that happen. The other thing I would tell you is this. When we ask questions, you know, when I first started teaching, I taught math and science. I would ask a question. How many hands go up? 2 or 3, right? Okay. And it's typically the same 2 or 3 hands that go up every time. Okay. One of the teachers yesterday said, I had one girl, I'd say, you can't ask any more questions. Okay. Because every time her hand, you know, her hand was the one that was up. So what we want to think about for a minute, I'm going to take 10 minutes and throw this out there. Project or problem-based learning. Okay. Either word is really the same thing. You'll hear it named one way. Some of you will hear it named another way. How many of you are doing some project-based learning in your school? Okay, a lot of hands going up, a lot of hands. But I want you to think about this just for a second. Again, this is not going to be new, but I want to kind of put it in context for you. Again, this goes back to the new evaluation and inspection framework. Number 9, challenge number 2, inquiry and research. What are the students doing? Is this why we do it? No. We do it because it's great pedagogy, but I just want to show you it's relevant to what the ministry is doing. Now, this is an overview of what project-based learning is all about. When you look at this focus right here is not in a one class period performance task we're doing. Now, that doesn't make a performance task a bad thing. They're good things. But when we really think about project-based learning, it's a little bit more extended. How extended? There's no guideline. I have one school that I've worked with in Maryland that every grade level in the district does a year-long project. Every subject area is involved in it. They do it from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. Every subject area is involved, and they have marking period or quarterly objectives that have to be met during that project, okay? But you have some that we do it on a topic. Like in science, in our Inspire Science, every module starts out with a STEM project. Real world connected, those kinds of things. So if we dive into these just for a minute, in the center, significant content, 21st century skills, got to involve those. Around the outside, in-depth inquiry, has a driving question, creates a need to know, involves student voice and choice, revision and reflection. Students have time to think about what they've done and alter it. And then there's some kind of public audience. So let's spend just a minute thinking about these right here. Okay, intended to teach significant content. The question I hated in math class as a math teacher, do I have any math teachers in here? Okay, what's the question we hate? Why do I have to learn this? When am I ever going to use this? You know, why? Okay, and you want to say, teaches you thinking skills. I already have thinking skills. That's not a good answer. I was very fortunate. My professor I had for my 3 levels of calculus and differential equations was a physics teacher. Now, his background was PhD was in physics. So when we asked him, what's this used for? He would say, well, let me show you what it's used for. A lot of mathematicians can't show you that, okay? So it's significant content. And what we mean by that, there's a real world application to what we're getting ready to do. I don't care if it's literacy, history, science, or social. I missed one. History, literacy, science, or math. Really should have that. And then it requires critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, and different forms of communication. We call those part of the 21st century skills. Now, I'm going to tell you, the way that we've traditionally done education, and one of the struggles we're having now in the US, and I think in other places in the world, there's a teacher shortage. So we have a lot of people coming in teaching high school math or science that have no educational background. They have a math degree or a science degree. And how do they teach? They teach like they were taught in university, which is what I'm doing today, unfortunately, standing up in front and talking to you, okay? These skills right here, you know what we're doing? We're educating students for an agrarian or an industrial society. Growing up in Detroit, most of my friends, their parents worked in the auto factories. In the auto factory, I don't need you to ask a question. I don't want you collaborating with the guy at the machine next to you. I just need you to put the door on and put those 2 bolts on. Don't ask questions. Don't think about how it can be done better. Just do what I say. And in fact, you know what we've done? We've trained students to do that. So any kindergarten, 1st grade teachers in here? K1, okay. How many questions do your students ask? Oh, yeah. I mean, can we count how many they ask, right? How many of you teach 11th and 12th graders? How many questions do they ask? They've done studies on this, that from K, the amount of questions, to 12, it's like this. And you know what we've done? We've educated questioning out of them in the schoolroom. Now, they're still asking lots of questions outside the schoolroom. Just in the schoolroom, we've kind of educated out. See, what we want to do is get back to the fact where students are actually having to do the thinking. When you start doing problem-based learning or project-based learning in the classroom, students don't like it. Most students don't like it because I have to think and work. Just tell me what to do. Even when we do science labs, Hey, we're going to do a lab today. They're not looking for the connection to the concept. What are they trying to do? Get the form filled out and turn it in, okay? But really what we're looking at are these things right here. Because when they leave, and you think about your job, when they leave, what skills do they need? They need these things right over here. I want you to think just for a minute about information literacy for a second. When I was in school, middle school, high school, and we had to do a project, research, where did we go? Went to the library, right? Some of you young people in here will not remember this. We went to that card catalog and pulled that thing out and looked up the ideas, went to try to find the book, and it would be checked out. Okay? Now, if you want to know something, what do? Yeah. Oh, yeah, all of us do. I'm frugal with my money. And so not too long ago, my water heater quit working. And I don't particularly like a cold shower. Okay? And so I went down there, and you know you have to light the little pilot light and get it going. So I went down there and let it would come on, then it would go off. And I'd light it again, it would just go off. So I looked up on Google, why does the pilot light not stay on? And the most common reason is a little thing called the thermostat. And so then I Googled, how do you change a thermostat? And a YouTube video came up. So I went down to the store, and for $12, I got the thermostat, and I went back and put it in 15 minutes. And if I had called somebody out, it would have been $200. We Google it. The big thing today is not getting the information. It's how do students understand if the information is valid and what is the best information. And that doesn't happen by us telling them what the best answer is. So what do you think about that one? Now, if we go to the outside of problem-based learning, I want you to think about these things with me. Inquiry is required. And what that means, I can't just Google the answer. Who is the most famous actor in the world? Not a great question, because all I have to say is, who's the best actor in the world? And I get an answer. And I might disagree with it, but I don't need something that just gives me an answer. We need the students to have to dig for it and evaluate it in a good project. The second one, it's organized around an open-ended driving question. Okay? Now, these driving questions lead to significant content. So what do I mean by a driving question? Okay. Now, actually, I've said this every day and I haven't done it yet. I need to change these questions because some of these are not the best ones in the world. I do like the very first one, and change the word sweeter to better. How can we make life better in our community? That's a really big question. It could apply to science. It could apply to literacy. It could apply to our social sciences. I think there's even a way we could integrate the math teacher into this statistically with some of the work that we're doing. But if you think about this question, Singapore actually has a really interesting idea how they try to make the community better. The government in Singapore builds all the housing, and then you buy it from the government. Now, when you buy it, you don't own it. You get a 100-year lease. So I have it for 100 years. If I'm in it 10 years, I can sell it. I can sell it to you, and you got 90 years left. Okay? And their reasoning behind that, about 100 years, that building needs to be torn down, and we need to build a new one. Okay? But what's interesting about their observation is they have a mixed society, about 70 to 80% Chinese background, about 15% Malay background, and then another smattering mixed in there of other backgrounds. In that building, when you buy, the people in that building have to match the percentage of society. So 85%, 70 or 80% of that building has to be of Chinese descent. 10 to 15 have to be, because you know what they don't want? They don't want a Chinese segment of the city and a Malay section of the city. They want the cultures to interact. Now, is it working? When I talk to some of my Singapore friends, you know what? In a way it is. Is it perfect? No. But it was an idea of how they thought we could make life better in our community, right? Look at the bottom one. How do stories from the past define who we are today? That, by the way, that is a great question. One of the things that we've tried to do in our history books is ask these kinds of questions. So when students go in and let's say they're studying the history of our country, whatever country, And they're looking at it, and they're looking at wars that we were involved in long ago. For our students, long ago is like World War II, okay? When they're looking at that, how excited do they get? And excited is probably not a good word. How invested do they get in that topic? You know, because that happened so long ago, it doesn't mean anything to me, okay? The question that we ask around the American Revolution is, how does war impact the ordinary people of society? Now, I want you to think about that question for a minute. We could be looking at World War II. We could be looking at Alexander the Great's conquest. But that question is the same today as it was then. You talk to the people of Ukraine right now, they can tell you how war impacts the ordinary person in society. And you know what? Immediately, when you start to think of some of the things that happen, people are displaced. People lose their home. They lose access to medical care. They lose access to food and necessary things to survive. And having a student think through that makes what they're studying and the content we want them to get so much more real and important. But a good driving question makes all the difference. Now, I'm going to ask you guys to do something. You've been sitting here for a while, okay? At your table in 3s or 4s, okay? In 3s or 4s. If you guys want to do it in 2s, you could do that, okay? But what I'd like you to do is think in the subject area and the grade level I teach, what could be a good driving question? You may already be using it, but I want you to just think for a minute. You got about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. Think through that, and then we'll come back and have a little bit of discussion around that, okay? So you got 2 minutes. I'm timing you up here. Thank you. Can you get rid of the gray? There we go. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop you. I'm sorry. It's not enough time, I know. Here's one thing I would like to ask you to do, guys. So think about this for a second. How many are you sitting with people you know? If you're sitting with people you know, raise your hand way up. You know him? Okay. I just want to challenge you. In my opinion, one of the greatest resources we have are each other. Almost every good idea I've ever used in the classroom, I stole from somebody else. Okay. And then I made it better, hopefully. But and the thing is, when we're in our own groups, we tend to focus on what we already know. When you go out to a coffee break or you guys go to lunch, sit with some other people you don't know. Ask them what they're doing with project-based learning. How are they doing personalized or intensive intervention? Get some other ideas. Ask what their driving question was. Yesterday, we had a couple great ones. One of the ladies is science, and what they were looking at with high school students is her big question was, how do we make the world a better place to live in? And then what the students had to do was come up with a specific topic. One of the students came up with the idea of plastic pollution, and really the idea of how do we reduce plastic pollution in our community? Because you know what, plastic pollution, she actually shared a fact with me I wasn't so excited to know. You know that every year each of us eat about a half a credit card of plastic? Now, I don't know about you, but that's not my idea of a tasty treat, okay? So how could we remove some of that? One of the other ones that was brought up was one of the guys works with special ed students and students with disabilities. How could we make the community more accessible for our community members that have disability? To think about that. We were talking yesterday, one of our colleagues that had to start, a parent that had to start using a wheelchair and started noticing the places you go, how much more difficult it is with that, because you know, most of us don't even know where the lifts are. I mean, because we were using the stairs. They were in Dubai Mall and they were trying to find a lift, and it was like, I don't even know where they exist in here. They do, but you have to find them. But that's the idea behind a driving question. One of the gentlemen shared, and he's a literature teacher, and he said, how do reading stories from other cultures help us to develop more respect for each other? So some really interesting questions. Now, these last couple, I'm just going to touch on briefly. I keep saying that. Creates a need to know. And if you think of the questions we've been talking about, it really does engage students with the idea. It allows them some degree of voice or choice. Now, when we say that, it doesn't mean they necessarily even come up with the project, but how I'm going to do it or approach it, that big question, how can we make the world a better place? And they had to pick a specific topic, very much voice and choice on the student. Because if I come to you and tell you, here's the question, do these 5 things, then create this, and then do this, whose project is it? It's mine, it's not yours. So that's where the voice and choice come in. And then the last one, they need to have opportunity reflection and to do revision. And then lastly, a public audience. When we say public audience, it could be simply my class. Could be the school. I had one teacher that the students had to do the project, and what they had to produce was a website explaining what they did. They published it on the school webpage. Anybody that went there could investigate that. And then I've had some groups that have actually gone beyond that. I have a friend that's an engineering teacher, and their project, the students had to come up with a question. One student had a relative that was bedridden. And we all know if you're in a hospital in your bed a long time, you start to develop bed sores because of where your body's touching the bed. Well, they came up, how could we reduce that? That was their driving question. They actually designed a bed that had rollers that continually moved. So the same part of the body was not touching it. They got a patent for it and actually sold it to a company that now produces a form of it. Now, don't expect that to happen necessarily. The bigger the public audience, the more invested your students will get because they know who's going to see it. So think about that. So really, that ties that up. Now, I want to give you just one quick example walking through a project. By the way, if you're not doing this currently, don't try to come up with a question that does the whole year long. Start out with a topic, a unit of study, a set of texts, a quarter of, that we're doing where we do this. Don't just do it a day though. I mean, it's good to do those things, but I mean, make it something they have to actually work on. So I'm going to give you one example. This is out of our science program. I don't know if you know this, but when they went away from bar soap and started doing body wash, I'm going to blame this on the ladies in the room, okay? When they did the body wash, they put in these microscopic plastic beads to exfoliate our skin so it's nice and smooth and looks good, okay? Well, what they didn't realize, all those little microscopic beads go down the shower drain, okay? And then they go in the water system. And they look surprisingly like fish eggs. So aquatic organisms started eating them. They couldn't digest them. They would end up in the tissue. And then the other thing is that plastic started absorbing the toxins in the water. So this is kind of the background of the idea. What we did with this, it's around a specific topic. Some states and a lot of places now have banned the plastic beads. It's interesting what they use now. They grind up seashells, microscopically, and that's not what they put in the body wash. But in this one, students are going to be in groups and they're engineers. And what they have to do is design a short-term solution to remove those beads out of the water. Okay. Now, they're not coming up with the question. Their voice and choice is, how are we going to do this? Now, do you think this is going to require a little bit of research? Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be an obvious. Then what they're going to do is use the engineering design loop to create that. And this is the other part that's real world. These are some of the questions they have to be able to answer. So what types of constraints are there on my design? What's going to limit me? How much water do I have to filter out? That's a big question that I have to look at. Okay. What's the cost associated with it? You know what? Do you guys have any cost constraints in your school? Yeah, if you had unlimited money, we could do anything. You know what I mean? But we have to say, when we think about personalized core and intervention, I'm limited by constraints that I have. How do I do it the best way I can within that? Well, what kind of constraints, what benefit does it provide? And then at the end, they have to actually do a presentation to the government organization that they're producing this for. But here's our plan. Here's what it's going to cost. Here's what the benefits are and how effective it is. And this is why we would recommend that you do this plan. That's an example. You know what? This is a like 2-month project when you build the research and all that. But at the same time, they're taking the science that they're using and actually seeing the real world significance of what they're doing in that. So I already did that one with you. This is going to be the last one, okay, because I'm 1 minute over. PBLs can be year-long projects. They could be a semester. They could be a quarter. They could be a topic project. There's not really a link. Start out with something shorter. Performance tasks are good ways to get students involved in the idea. They're not a PBL, though. But performance tasks are good ways to get students thinking about the idea of application. Research projects do that. Up there, I have a website. It's in the handout, but I'm going to flip over here just for a second. If you haven't done much work with this before and you want some background, this is called PBL Works. It's from the Buck Institute. Notice right across the top, what's PBL? Why PBL? How to get started? What are some of the project and resources that we could use to do this? So it actually has suggestions for you for every subject area and multiple grade levels. So the link is in the handout. By the way, one last thought. If you're not currently doing this, and you looked and said, this is something we need to start doing at our school, or I need to start doing in my classroom. Don't just walk into a building and say, hey, everybody, we're going to do PBLs, get started. We all know there's a little bit professional learning goes into it. This is a great source to start using that around some professional learning about how to do this effectively. Okay. Now, I did the same thing I did yesterday. You're going to get step 3, data-driven instruction in the handout. We're not going to do it right now because I ran out of time. So I'm going to flip ahead just a bit. And I want to get to my last screen. So I ask you to do 2 things. Thoughtfully consider. And then what are you going to do with what we talked about today? Okay. What are you going to do with it? So this is the one you're waiting for. If you want the handout, by the way, I would tell you, it's a zip folder. It has several documents in it. If you pull it up on your phone, you'll see the zip folder. If you have any trouble downloading that, just wait till you get back to your computer and put that URL in, and you can download the folder and then extract it, and you'll have all the files that are in there, okay? So think about it. We really looked at 2 specific topics, learning loss and how we have to meet that. And then secondly, this whole idea of then improving individual student performance based on getting them involved in real world projects that make a difference and make the subject come alive. So what are you going to do with it? The most important thing is right now, which is coffee break. Okay. So it's set up out in the lobby for you. Just remember, after coffee break, K-5 literacy is in here. If you go out the door and turn right, the first room you'll come to will be science. The second room is math. And if you're 612 ELA, go past the elevators, you'll see the sign. After you pass the elevators, you'll see the room on your right. Okay? Go get some refreshments. Get a chance. Remember, while you're out there, talk to somebody you don't know. Ask them about their driving question. Hi. Good. You?
I have a lot of math teacher, and I think we were talking about the.
Let me move this real quick so he can send. Yep.
I related.
So really the biggest thing is that when you look at a building, you look at the students in that building. Where we're looking at the situation right now, if we don't already have intensive MBA set up, that's really targeting on the easiest way to start reaching our students is through some kind of personalized program. Okay. So really then, and I'm not in-depth familiar with that. I'm somewhat familiar with it. When I'm looking at that, am I really targeting it to the students, and how am I using it that they're spending time working on what those prerequisites is? If I have some students that are 4 or 5 grade levels below, it might even be a consideration that we need to pull them out of the grade level class they're in, and we need to use that time to really boost them up. Because the reason I say that, if I'm sitting in 7th grade math, I'm working on a 4th grade level, even though I'm sitting in class, I'm not picking up the idea. No. So part of it, where the intensive intervention falls, it may be a better option to actually take them and take that time, build that skill set up. So by the time they get to the next year, I'm ready to move ahead.
Because algebra 1 right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you look at this course, you do 4 or do 5.
Yeah.
So whatever I'm saying in class is blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
And they're not picking up anything there because they're watching the transition.
Right. Because that's what I mean. Do we have the will to actually say, in order to meet the needs of the student, I can't just putting them in algebra 1 because they're not going to be successful. I have to go back and actually do something. So wouldn't I rather take a student and get 2 or 3 grade levels gained this year? And then in 2 years, I could have them up to algebra 1? Or do I want to leave them in algebra 1 and say that, they're going to have the same problem next year when they go into gym? But it's the will of the building and the leaders to be able to say, and that's the sad thing, Steve, those students, they have no interest in math. I don't even understand what to do. So it really is a discussion with building leadership with the other math teachers. We know this is a problem. We know this is not the solution. What are we going to do to come up with this? That's a quick answer to a very complex question. Yeah, and it's different for every building because regardless of the building we're in, our solution and our constraints are different than somebody else's. Yeah. Yeah, so it's to think about and then what action do we take? Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Let me try. Okay. Can you try it again?
Yeah.
Yes. So what I would do, for you.
They ask me mobile number, then you can
Okay.
they send code and you put the code and they declare that.
Yes.
Okay. So what I would try,
Then you start just
when you
next.
get back to your
Yes.
computer,
Oh.
just type that in.
Same.
Oh, okay.
Type that into the URL bar.
11, I think 11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't we start at 11, DJ?
Have fun, man.
You do the same. Well, nice session. You look good in lights.
Pardon?
You look good up there in the lights.